Yeah, so I think if there's one really, really important piece of advice in the whole UI conversation, do what works. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't overthink it. Don't get cute. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Advancing Success, where we help businesses like yours become more successful. How do we do that? We uncover ways in which custom websites, apps, and software can take your business to a whole new level. I'm your host, Joe Sandine, and today we're going to talk about how user interface can make your employees more efficient and increase customer satisfaction. Joining us today is Mike Unser, one of our user experience architects. Mike has worked with hundreds of businesses throughout the years to take what can often be complex technical requirements and turn them into very simple tools that can help your business become much more efficient. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Joe.
So, Mike, I want to ask you, in the world of software development, so when you're working with a business who maybe we're redesigning their CRM or a customer portal or some piece of software that they've had for a long time, what do you normally, so in the world of user interface for software, what are some of the do's and don'ts when you're coming up with what that interface should be like? Because in software that's going to be used internally for a business or presented to the end customer, a lot of information there, a lot of things you got to present to them. How do you normally find success when it comes to software development UI? And what are some of the things that maybe go totally wrong or that you just should not be doing in that area of expertise?
Yeah, I think one thing we like to do during our discovery process is really talk about, well, who's going to be using this? Like, what user groups are going to be using this? And within those user groups, who wants what information? Because we can build it in such a way that we'll present the information that's only relevant to you, right? So like sales versus accounting versus manufacturing versus warehouse, whatever that might be, right? So
okay, so you're going to understand the different silos of the audience,
correct,
so that when that person logs in, you can tailor the experience.
Yeah, if Joe in the warehouse logs in, he's just going to see the stuff that applies to him. He's not going to see all this other stuff that he doesn't need to know anything about.
And I think that's a common, I think what I've seen over the years, it was a common problem in the past where somebody would build a piece of software and they wouldn't necessarily worry about who the end user was that was logged in. So they would present pretty much the same thing to everyone.
Yeah, here's everything, but this is the section you're going to go. This is your site. This is the section you're going to go into. You don't need to worry about any of that other stuff.
Yeah, so they've got to sift through all the things they don't care about to get to what they actually care about. So the general concept of personalization obviously is an important component to user interface 100%.
Design. And then the other thing too is it goes right back to the discussion about a marketing website, right? The deeper you get in, the more information should be presented to you, right? So
because you know at a deeper level who they are and what they care about.
Well, that too, and just you might have, for example, if you had a salesperson entering in 50 quotes in a day, there's only certain information you need to know about those, right? Maybe the quote number, a description of what it was, the quote told, like how much the quote was. But then once you dive into that quote, then it's going to be all kinds of different details about what it is that was being sold, right? So to just present those at face value on the first page, you don't need to show all that detail. Just show the detail that's relevant and then let them dig in to get the rest of the detail. So, because it's not, that's one thing that we've struggled with as designers and developers is everyone wants to show all the data all the time. And with, tablets and mobile and even smaller laptops and stuff like that, it's not possible. It is with responsive tables and stuff, but it's just not, it's not super intuitive. It's kind of clunky, and there's no way you're ever going to fix that. That's just the way it is. You can only show so much data at a time, especially on a phone. So trying to limit the amount of data, I think, is always a good thing until someone wants to collect that data and then allowing them to dig deeper into that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what would be some telltale signs that my website or my mobile app or my customer portal has bad UI? Like, what would be some of the warning signs or symptoms that I would be experiencing that the light bulb should come on and I should say, maybe I need to sit down and maybe think about the user interface a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing to consider would be like if you went to a website and you clicked on a link where you would assume you were going to get a form, and the form comes up, and the minute you look at it, you think, I have to fill out all this? Like, that's a problem.
So the symptom, so as a business owner, the symptom there might be we're just not getting a lot of people to fill out the form, period.
Yeah, because they're either going to look at it and be overwhelmed and just not even start. Yeah. Or if you get them going down the path where they think it's going to be an easy process, and then they're 12 steps in and they're like, you know what, this is not what I signed up for. And they're going to stop at that point. So trying to reduce the number of questions, reduce the number of steps, really get down to brass tacks and like, what do we really need to ask these people?
Yeah, so I think simplicity is just a common theme in this whole thing.
It is.
And I think that's where, I'm a business owner, and I think you can tend to overcomplicate, want to get too much. And you're thinking, hey, I'm in this business, I'm passionate about it. Oh, my customer or my dealer or my employee or whoever my audience is, they must have the same level of passion, but they really don't.
No.
Like, you have to really be careful.
Very rarely.
And I don't know what the stats are, but like, people's attention spans these days are just so reduced. We have so much information flying at us all the time. I think that begs the question of like, how important is simplicity in this whole process to make sure that I'm only getting what I need to get my user to the next step of the game. A common example I often give is TurboTax. While it can be a long process and a lot of questions, what I think works in the TurboTax user interface example is that you don't have to think real hard. It just takes you question by question. And with each question you ask, it learns a little bit more so that it knows the right next question to ask. What's your take on that approach versus maybe hammering someone with a million questions on one page, or just taking a different approach than that? Because that's a very simple, like, one little thing at a time. It might take me, or it might feel like, it's 187 questions, but at the end of the day, it would have been 187 questions the other way too, right? So how do you compare those two approaches to the user interface?
A lot of it has to do with what task are you trying to accomplish? Because like doing your taxes, not a simple task. So they obviously break it down, right? The whole, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So they break it down and they make it easy for you. Whereas if that's kind of an expectation, going in to do your taxes, you're not going to do it in 5 minutes.
You're kind of prepared already for it.
Yeah, it's going to take some time. You got all your papers and you're sitting down and you start going through the process, right? Whereas if you want to get an estimate on something for your house, for instance, maybe you can ask a half a dozen questions to a subcontractor and they could give you a estimate range pretty easily, right? I want to redo my bathroom. Is it a half bath? Is it a full bath? Do you want a tiled shower? Do you just want a dry? Like, you could ask those few questions and then they can give you a relatively accurate estimate based on that, right? Pretty quickly. But the whole tax thing, that's going to take some time. Do you have this form? Yeah, I do. Look on this line, what number's on there? Put it in here. Next. And then, like you said, I'm sure they built in such a way that it's so smart that it knows, like, well, they answered this for this, so chances are this is also going to apply, so we should ask.
So I think it just kind of proves the point that depending on the business's process or what we're talking about, you're going to have different UI thoughts about how it should be put together, whether it should be one question at a time, should it be 5 different steps of 3 or 4 questions on each one. You're going to make those decisions based on the business and who the customer is or who the audience is and how detailed it's going to be.
That and where they're at in the process, right? Because if you look at that example, for instance, TurboTax, the first thing is you got to pick which one you think is going to be, and maybe they don't have it this way anymore, but like a lot of it is like tiered pricing things. Like, are you just a single person doing your taxes? Are you married? Are you, you know what I mean? Like, so once making that decision should be easy for them. But then once they've made that decision and they've purchased the product, then they know that, well, this is going to be a little bit more complicated. And so when I go in and start like actually doing this, it's not going to be 2 minutes. It's going to be, it could take me up to an hour, but hopefully they make that process a little less painless.
So one thing I think is interesting, and I'm curious how you handle this, is we can sometimes have user disparity in an interface. So like the examples would be younger people versus older people, or tech savvy users versus non-tech savvy users. When you're designing a user interface, how do you accommodate for that, knowing that you might have a large disparity in the user base that's even interacting with this?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think that is difficult because the one thing we'll talk to clients about, because they want to be everything to everyone a lot of the time. And you can't. You really can't. So you have to decide, well, who really is your target audience? Yeah, these other people might be coming and filling a form out or performing whatever task. But if they're the 5%, but your base is the 95%, don't worry about that 5%. They'll figure it out.
So you need to focus on your largest demographic.
Focus on who you really want to be driving.
I understand that. What do you ever do things within the UI where maybe, so I'm going to take the example of tech savvy versus non-tech savvy, maybe presenting a more simplistic user interface to start, but then maybe allowing the more tech savvy user to drill down deeper or get more complicated. Do you have any examples where you've maybe implemented something like that, where on the surface it's fairly simplistic, but you allow the tech savvy user to go deep if they want to?
Yeah, that's, I think a good example of that would be, and this is going to be more just design, not necessarily like filling out a form or whatever that might be, but a lot of our clients make very technically complicated pieces of equipment and stuff like that. So you've got salesmen coming and looking, you've got maybe even assistant to a CEO that's tasked with something. So, or you'll have engineers coming to look for like specs and like blueprints and stuff like that. Sure. So typically what I'll do is at the top of the page, you'll start really high level and really basic. And then as you scroll down, then it gets a little bit deeper and it gets a little bit deeper. And then eventually it'll get to the point where, well, this is the information like an engineer is going to want to look at. They're going to want to be able to like download spec sheets and look at schematics and stuff like that. So you just have to build the page in such a way that the really high level information is there for those who are looking for that and need that, but still allow those that are looking for like the deep detail to get into that too. And that information might live on a completely separate page. Sure. So, I mean, the farther you get into a website, the more detailed and technical the information should get, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think so. That's a great point to hit on from a UI perspective. Is don't go off into left field somewhere and start doing something that people aren't used to. I think what people have to understand is you have to stick to common, well understood design principles. So that I always say people shouldn't, like if you're building an app, when I open your app, I shouldn't have to get a migraine trying to figure out how to use it or have to think too hard. It should just be natural. And what makes that natural? It's that your app feels the same and is structured in a similar way as the app I just got done using. I mean, would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's no different than cars. I mean, you get in a car and for the most part, the steering wheel's here.
Yeah, don't put the shifter behind here, my neck.
Radio's
back
here. Yeah, Jared always talks about how you don't put the steering wheel on the roof because that wouldn't make any sense. Like,
yeah,
because we get a lot of clients who are like, well, it's got to be different.
We got to
do
special.
It. Like, well, no, you don't. Like, that's not what you should be doing.
Yeah, so I think if there's one really, really important piece of advice in the whole UI conversation, do what works. Don't overcomplicate it. don't overthink it, don't get cute. Like, people have blazed these trails for a reason, right? To find out the best way to, like, we all put doors in the same way. We don't put the handle in a weird spot. Like, why do that with your software, right?
Yeah, there's definitely certain things where that's just the way you do it and you don't change it. But then there are places where you can be a little bit more
innovative
or experimental, but like, you have a top navigation on your website. That's just what you do. That's what everybody does. That's what's expected. So like, back in the day, people were doing all kinds of crazy stuff with mystery meat navigations and like all these different things. And
so what do you do, Mike? So like, when you're working with or let's just say you're a business and internally, maybe you've got one or two people that kind of want to go rogue and be cute and do odd or weird or unexpected behavior. How do you recommend people rein that back in? Like, how do you have a fruitful conversation about it and get those people kind of back to like, hey, let's kind of stick to what's expected here?
Yeah, I think a lot of that, like we said, a lot of that has to do with how the internet and websites have evolved, right? We're at the point now where we get a lot of clients who say, well, that looks like every other website out there. True.
It kind of should in a way.
They kind of should in a way. Yeah. It's like most cars look pretty similar, right? You've got doors and four wheels and an engine and like the basics are there. So where you differentiate yourself is photography, content, the way you talk about things, use plain language. I mean, that's one thing where you talked about, back when you and I worked together at an accounting firm, they like to talk about technical or not like plain language things. They'd say audit, or what I think they called it, assurance services. That's auditing an account. That's auditing. Like, you got to make sure that the way you talk about things are the way most people talk about things, not the way you talk about things because you're in that industry.
Yeah, good points. I mean, design and content kind of play together in that way. Like, you have to use the right terminology and then embed that terminology into the design appropriately, keep it simplistic, speak in the right language, obviously.
Totally, 100%. And the other thing too is there was a speaker I attended at one point in time or something. I can't remember who it was, but they mentioned nobody cares who you are for the most part.
What are you saying?
They care about
Mike?
what you can do for them. They care about what you can do for them. You know what I mean? Like, it's the experience with your product or the brand. It's like whatever benefit they can get, that's what's important to them. They don't want to come to your website and hear about how great you are and all these. They want to know, well, what can you do for me? Because I can buy a car anywhere. But what does your car do better?
Why you? Why should I buy
that
it from
car?
you?
Or why would I? Like Subaru, for instance, people who buy Subarus, they're typically like earth conscious people. They want to give back because they do their whole, I can't remember what it's called, but where they donate a certain amount to a charity when you buy a car. Like, that's their differentiator. So what's yours? Because if it's just, well, I sell this widget, well, they sell the same widget over here for $10 less, so why wouldn't I just go buy it from them? So you got to explain, well, this is why you would buy it from us, because we
and that's got to be baked into the experience and at the right time, at the right place.
Yeah, it's got to be in your content. It's got, all that.
Thank you, Mike, for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We hope that you got some great insights out of today's conversation regarding UI and UX and all the great user experience things that you need to figure out when you're building your next website or app or custom software project. Don't forget to subscribe to the Advancing Success podcast for more useful tips. I'm Joe Sandine. Thanks for tuning in.